Hi, everyone. It's Tania DaSilva, the Clinical Director of Behavior Matters. I have not been on camera or really done any press or been front facing for a while. I've actually been on back to back mat leave. So I have a daughter who is now 2 and she is starting nursery school in September. And I have a 10, well, almost 10-month-old as well. So I have been busy and kind of staying on the back end of the business, just making sure that things are running smoothly while kind of navigating all my family dynamic changes. But as I was sitting here and I was thinking about my daughter starting nursery school for the first time, and really just doing everything that I know to help prep her so that she starts off on the best foot, I decided to just start recording and basically record kind of tips, strategies, things to start thinking about to make sure that your return to school in the next couple weeks is also as smooth as it possibly can be. So this is something that, I actually started thinking about last night, funny enough. My youngest woke up, she woke me up, and then I couldn't get back to sleep. So I ended up kind of just jotting down different things that I wanted to do when I realized that, summer is on its way out. And, in a couple weeks, my daughter is going to be in nursery school and away from me for the first time ever in her life. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I just jotted down a whole bunch of things. And then I thought about, all the back to school press I typically do. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just put everything in this video, put it out to our community through our newsletter, on our YouTube channel. And you're potentially watching this maybe in some chopped up clips, or you've seen it in some chopped up clips as well on socials. But I figured let's just put it all in one place because we are all in this together trying to figure out the back to school navigations. Something that I always like to kind of start with, and you're going to notice I want to make sure I'm not missing any of my points because I was jotting all of these down and they all kind of have a reason or a benefit. So I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So the first thing that we're going to start with, and this is obviously usually, we would say it's a no brainer, but sometimes we get caught in the excitement of summer and we're like, oh God, I did not start adjusting my schedule. We did not, pay attention to how much screen time we were still, having. And now we're back to school and our routine's not in order and our kids are having withdrawals from their screens. So it seems like a no, but to be honest, we get caught up in the summer rush of things and we sometimes don't ease into this. So the reason that I'm starting with this is because when I recording this time and day is basically August 22nd. So for me, this kind of hit me where I was like, my daughter is going to be starting and everyone's kids are going to be starting school within, the next 2-week period. So this is the perfect time to start prioritizing the routine. And obviously we can do it in a more kind of extreme, like right back, pull the Band-Aid off, or a gradual way. And we'll talk about both. Something I want you to start thinking about is bedtime, wake ups, and screen time. So these are routines that we want to start prioritizing in terms of adjusting them back. So you want to start either, and I'll kind of give you the two ways that we could do this. So you can either just pull off the Band-Aid and be like, you know what, as of tomorrow, we're going back to our school bedtime, right? Routine. So yes, it's summer. You're going to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock. I'm guilty of this too. My daughter, it just turned 2 in the summer. And sometimes I look at the clock and I'm like, it's 9 o'clock, it's 9:30. You are still up. You need to go to bed. So obviously with back to school, it's going to become problematic if they're up that late, right? So we definitely want to think about what is, our nighttime routine when we're in school. And if you're just pulling off the Band-Aid, then you can go right back to that. So if bedtime is 7 o'clock, if it's 8 o'clock, whatever the time is, we're like starting tomorrow, we're going back to that routine. The other thing that's really important is that morning wake up. So again, I know, well, maybe not everyone, but I love when my kids sleep in because I get to sleep in. So right now, my kids typically sleep until about 7:30, which is great. But again, when I'm trying to get her to school, that's just not going to be doable, right? With making sure we get breakfast and we get, go through our whole morning routine to get out the door on time. So you want to also start either again, pulling off the Band-Aid and then just waking up at the time that you should be waking up for school. So whether that's 6, that's 7, everyone's schedule is obviously different. So bedtime and morning routine, we want to either pull off the Band-Aid and go right back to what those are so that it gives it gives our family 2 weeks to get into that habit so that when it starts, officially in September, we're already on that habit. So it's easy. Some families do struggle with that because there's still a lot of things that are happening over the summer. So what you can do if you want to do it a little bit more gradually is if we're not at that week before school, I strongly suggest going right back to that routine. But if you're still in like that 2-week mark, whatever, 2.5-week mark, what you can start doing is the gradual. So starting to pull back by like 15 minutes, 30 minutes. So we're getting closer to that bedtime, or again with wake ups, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. You can start kind of slowly moving back. So You can decide what works best for you, but I strongly suggest the week before that we are fully back on that schedule. Another thing that comes up when we're thinking about scheduling as well is screen time. So this is something that we are all obviously very aware of. Screens are becoming just a big part of everyone's day, everyone's day and everyone's life, right? So you want to think about that as well. What is your screen time schedule when we're in school, and what does it become over the summer? And again, you can either cold turkey it and kind of pull back and be like, nope, you know what? We're putting screens away. We're going back to only having them an hour a day or on weekends, or again, whatever your back to school routine is. Or again, if you worry about the pushback and the screaming and all that typically comes with screen time boundaries that we try to put in, you can also do the gradual of like 15 minutes, 30 minutes and start pulling back. And then, again, if we're trying to remove a day, today we're not doing it, tomorrow we are. You can figure out what that looks like. But again, I would strongly, strongly suggest that last week, the week that we're counting down, there's 7 days left for our kids to go back to school, that screen time is also completely in line with the way that you want it to be when they're back in school. A couple other things that we don't think about with schedules is meals. So this is a big one too. So I know, especially if you have picky eaters, my daughter is such a picky eater. So meal times are not easy for us. When you're thinking about meals, so if your kids right now are waking up later and they're having their first meal at like 9 o'clock or 9:30, they're not like that first day of school. If you're trying to wake them up and get them to eat at like 7:30 or whatever time it is, they're not going to want to, because their body is going to be like, well, I'm not hungry yet. The other way this comes up is then at 9:30 when they're at school, they might be starving and it's not lunchtime yet, right? So we also want to think about meals and bringing those back. So when are they going to be eating breakfast? When are they going to be eating lunch? When would they be having, after school snack? When would our dinners be when we're back in our school routine? And again, ideally, we'd be pulling that back within that 2 week mark, but definitely within that week mark, you want to make sure that you're back into that schedule. So when, again, September starts and that first day of school rolls around, our meal schedule is a lot more aligned, right? We know that if anyone's hangry, it obviously impacts our mood and our interaction. So we want to avoid that at all costs. And so that's another scheduling thing that you want to make sure you're prioritizing and getting back into a routine. So those are typically the 4 things. I know I kind of added in mealtime, but I thought about it at the end. Wake ups, bedtimes, screen time, and meal time. So get back on a routine there. Another thing that I was thinking about when I was typing this all up, getting back into a routine, but actually providing your kids with like a visual, like nighttime routine. It could either be, like a schedule where there's like images for your younger kids. It could be a checklist if your kids are a little bit older, but you really want to think about what are our steps. So what are our nighttime, like evening routine steps? What are our morning routine steps? What are those? What do those look like? And we want to essentially go over those with our kids. If we want them to start building independence, that's why the visuals are really helpful, because there's certain things that they can do on their own, and it just helps guide them by looking at the next picture, right? Or the next step on their list. Well, again, obviously depends on how old they are, but you want to create that and you want to review that with them. And we're going to go into actually like dry runs as well. And that's going to bring this up. But first, what you want to do is really create it, go through the steps and make sure you're all on the same page. You can even include them in the process if it's order, right? You give them choice where maybe they want to do this before that. And again, it's not a big deal to you. It just makes them feel included in the process. So nighttime routine, bedtime routine. And again, ideally, we're going to start actually implementing this and putting this into practice so that we feel like we're ready and we have a pretty good routine going by the time we get back to real school and the real routine. Another thing that helps actually with the routines. So even thinking about, we sometimes call it drop zones or launch pads. So at the end of the day, maybe there is, a drop zone where it's like, okay, so where are you dropping your backpack? Where are you dropping your dirty clothes? Where are you dropping, your lunchbox? So a drop zone. So there's probably different drop zones depending on what you're asking them to drop. But where are all the drop zones, right? And then where are all the launch zones? So the things that we don't want to be scrambling for in the morning, right? The things that we want to know where they are. So maybe our launch zone is we're picking our clothes the night before and we're putting them, on the chair, on the, bottom of our bed, whatever. So we know where they are. So in the morning, we just launch. We put on the clothes that are there and, we start going through the rest of our routine. Maybe it's our backpack. Where's the launch zone? So at the end of the day, our schoolwork, everything's going, back into the backpack and we're leaving it at the front door. So when it's time to launch, we know where everything is. areas. So again, create those drop zones and those launch zones. It's really going to help with just organization and structure and routine and just making everybody feel like they know where things are, where things need to go. It just avoids a lot of that chaos. And again, I have visuals of that running around looking for things that I don't remember where I put them. We want to avoid all that altogether. And kids, I find, kind of really connect to that wording of drop zone and launch zone. So something else to consider there when we're really just thinking about kind of easing back into that routine early. So another thing that I want to highlight is that back to school countdown. And we're also going to talk about practicing those dry runs. So back to school countdown, again, you can do this visually as a calendar. So let's say, we have our August calendar and we have the last 2 weeks. I like to highlight 2 different things typically. So summer is coming to an end. What are things that we really want to do before summer ends, right? So again, we might not be able to do them all, but it just essentially makes us feel like we have ownership and control over summer ending. And hopefully, again, we're ending on a positive note. So going over that and actually putting it in the calendar. Let's say Wonderland is something your kids want to do that you haven't done yet. When are we going to go? This is kind of our countdown to the end of school, beginning of school, end of summer. So we want to make sure that we get this done. We also want to add in the things that are coming up, right? So the countdown, this is our first day of school. This is the day we're going to go right back to, bedtime routines or screen time's going to end. These are the days that we're going to practice our dry run where we're going to get up in the morning and actually drive to school. So you can use that calendar to basically highlight the things that we're excited about, happening, the things that we want to be aware of. Another thing that I find really helps with the back to school countdown, and this is something that sometimes, again, we overlook. Sometimes our kids, they lose touch with their friends throughout the summer. They don't see them as often as they'd like to. They don't see them at all. So something you want to be mindful of, and I know this isn't always possible, but, in those last 2 weeks of summer, can we also encourage our kids to reconnect with their friends, right? So again, this is the countdown to, you're going to see these kids again, right? You're going to be around these kids again. So maybe let's, FaceTime them. Maybe let's set up a play date or a park date or whatever, but let's kind of re-engage and start interacting with them again. And again, all these strategies you can age up or down for your younger kids, but these also work for your teens. You just have to age them up, right? So maybe we're noticing our teens haven't seen anyone from, high school or whatever from school. And we want to encourage them to plan something, even like an end of summer party or get together or anything, right? To just re-engage in that social piece. And again, I know it's not always possible, but if it is, definitely something that I find really helps with building that excitement to go back to school. So that is the back to school kind of countdown. And then we want to move into practicing the school runs. So this is something I'm going to do with my daughter. And it's funny because I'm not even just doing it for her. I'm also doing it for me. So I don't feel stressed out. So I know, first of all, I can see any of my blind spots that I'm not thinking, is going to be problematic in terms of maybe parking, drop-offs, whatever it is that I need to know. I obviously want to do a dry run for myself, especially because it's a school that I've never been to, right? So if any of you have kids that are starting a brand new school, it's going to be even more important, but it's still important to do the dry run regardless. But you're going to do this dry run, right? So I would probably suggest doing it, 1 to 3 times. You don't really have to do it more than that. 2 is probably even ideal, but basically you do your full nighttime routine, you do your full morning routine, and then you actually, walk to school, bike to school, drive to school, whatever you go. And you go through that process. And when you get there, maybe you spend some time, in the yard, in the area. And again, just get re-familiar with it, right? Not just kind of go and then run back. Like we want them to mentally be there. Be like, okay, we're going to be back here soon. So it can just be honestly hanging out in the schoolyard for a little bit, sitting outside the school for a bit. And you can even connect this to another strategy that we're going to get into as well. So definitely the back to school dry run. You can even think about, say there's like after school drop off, maybe someone else is taking care of them, extracurriculars, tutoring, therapy. So we notice that a lot in the summer as well. Sometimes families will take a break. So maybe, we are booking a session that last week to get back in the flow with our tutor or with our therapist, or we're walking to the dance studio or, wherever our extracurricular is, just to, again, get familiar with this is going to be our routine again. This is picking up soon. So any way that you can do a dry run. Another thing that I find we overlook, and honestly, this is one that I find families, when they do this, are very happy that they did it. It's reintroducing introducing learning gently. So summer is super fun for most kids, right? They're at sleepaway camp, they're at day camps, they're sleeping in, they're playing outside, they're getting a whole bunch of screen time, they're doing all the things that they love to do for the most part. And then all of a sudden it's like, bang, we're back at school and now you have to learn and, do homework or assignments or reading, and that can hit you like a ton of bricks. So something we really suggest doing is essentially reintroducing those learning moments. So something I stress here, and again, your child, so you'll take this and you'll decide what's best. For some kids, how there's like those, I mean, we all know what these are, but those grade books where it's like grade 5 or grade 4, and it's like all the different things that they would essentially be learning in that grade. If you have a child that would potentially be excited about the new stuff that they're going to learn, maybe they want to get ahead, say they're starting grade 5, you can get them a grade 5 book where, again, these last couple of weeks, every day we're doing a couple of worksheets, or, we're just getting in that zone so that they're prepping for it. Some kids, if you get them the grade ahead and it's stuff they haven't learned yet, it actually makes them really anxious and it's not setting them up for success. So if you have a child that you think might become more anxious with already reviewing the grade ahead, get the grade that you just finished. So say that they just finished grade 4, they're going into grade 5, get them a grade 4 workbook. That way you're doing a review where it's like, okay, so we finished grade 4, we're going into grade 5, we need to get back into, our study zone and our, study practice. So we're going to kind of do these worksheets because a lot of the stuff you might remember, maybe some of it you forgot, but it's just going to be good practice, right? So that sometimes works better if the new stuff might overwhelm them. But you, again, want to align that with your routine. So if it is after school, 4 o'clock, we're going to start doing our worksheets and our workbooks, and again, you can build up to this 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, but you really want to start getting them used to that. Same with screen time. Obviously, we're already reducing it, but what you can even start doing is encouraging or introducing more learning games where it's like, okay, so these last 2 weeks, we're going to do less, Roadblocks, Fortnite, whatever it is that they're playing right now. And we're going to start doing more educational games, right? So you can have your screen time, but it has to be educational or it's going to be shortened, right? So that's a way to kind of just essentially kind of influence them actually wanting to be on screen time where, okay, so today you can get 30 minutes or we're going to skip today. But if you do get 30 minutes, it has to be this game, this educational game, whatever. So again, we're reintroducing more of that learning and getting them into that headspace. So let me see, is there anything else I wanted to highlight there? No, honestly, I feel like the way that we want to look at this and the way that we want to phrase it, I'm just thinking about phrasing for them, is by doing this, it starts to wake up that part of our brain, right? So that part of our brain's been on vacation the same way we've been on vacation and we need to wake it up, right? So I find that wording kids typically relate to as well, and they might not want to do it, but it's a non-negotiable, right? We need to start getting back into that routine. And it's going to make September obviously easier. So we so far have talked about easing into the routines early, that back to school countdown, practicing those dry runs, and then reintroducing learning gently. There's actually 3 other things I want to highlight. You do want to involve them in the prep, right? So this is one thing. And again, this is a pretty standard one, but one we just want to be mindful of. So we want to start including them in the prep. And we've already done that in a lot of the other strategies where it's creating their visual routines and maybe the order, but even, simple things. And we all probably remember this, right? But going like back to school shopping, getting a new pencil case, getting a new outfit. So really involving them in that prep so that there's something they're excited about, them picking their lunchbox, them helping you figure out, the drop zones and the launch zones and everything else that goes into that. You really want to make it exciting and fun and kind of do it as a team. And giving them choices, again, makes them feel like, they have power in certain things. So it could be super simple things like, yeah, which lunchbox do you want? Where should we drop off our bags? Where should we put our clothes in the morning? So giving them choice just gives them that sense of like power and independence. And obviously that just makes them feel more confident and more included. So any way we can do that in this process, we want to do. 2 other things that I want to highlight. I call this future self planning. I think kind of future self work is obviously really big, kind of in the adults community when we're talking about just like mental health and, peak performance and stuff like that. But I do like bringing this in for kids as well. So when I'm talking about future self planning, and again, you can do this with like your 4-year-olds, right? Like you can literally do this all across the board. Obviously, it would just be age appropriate, but you want to, and this is where I said it could tie back to the dry run. Like you can sit in that school and you can do this together there, but have the conversation around like what intentions do they want to set for the year? What goals do they want to make for the year? And again, your goals could be academic goals. It can be independence goals. It could be social goals. goals, right? But like, what goals do we want to set? What intentions, right? Like, do we want to try out for something that we've been scared to try out for? Do we want to talk to more kids that usually we're, like too shy to talk to? So what are our goals? What are our intentions? And I mean, even as parents, obviously you don't want to overwhelm them with your goals for them and your intentions, but you can also highlight that as well, right? These are the goals that, I have for us this year, or I want to help you for this year. And these are the intentions, that I have. You can also in that conversation normalize all those big hard feelings that come with back to school as well. And then you can also review calming strategies and coping strategies. And so what I mean by this is kids, and so I'm going to kind of go off topic here for a bit, but it's all going to come back together. So when kids start school, something that we hear a lot of, is families kind of being like, I don't get why this is so hard for them. They've been at the school since they were a kid. They know the school, they know, the grade of kids. But the reality is that it's never the same experience for our kids when they're going grade to grade. So first and foremost, the teachers typically change, right? So every year you have a different teacher. So you have to adjust to a different teaching style. And honestly, some years are harder than others because maybe you really loved the teacher from last year. And now this year, you're having a harder time connecting. So it's a new teacher. Again, it might be the same class of kids, but it could be a different dynamic or structure, right? So maybe, the kids that they're sitting beside or the certain kids that now are in their actual classroom are kids that are making the experience a little different for them, right? So that dynamic also changes. And then year to year, every year we expect more and more from our kids, right? Like they're going through milestones, they're going through growth, they're building independence every year, right? So every year it's like new material they're learning, it's new routines, new expectations. So back to school is new every year for them, right? Even if it doesn't feel like it's new, it's new. New teachers, new dynamics, new expectations. They're growing, they're changing, like new social interactions and, dynamics that come up there as well, like new academic expectations. Everything is just new. So that's something that I find is really helpful. And when we're maybe frustrated or not really understanding why back to school is so hard, every year is new for them. And then we hope, once they settle in that they're happy with their teacher and, the dynamics in their class and that they're starting to pick up on whatever the new, social expectations or academic expectations are. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes our kids might have a harder year because they don't mesh with the teacher as well as they did with other teachers, or the classroom dynamic is different, right? And it's not, as good as it has been, or maybe as we'd like it to be. So we always want to be mindful of that as well. So it isn't always, it isn't always easy. And this is why it's not always easy. So you want to think about, yes, they're going back potentially to the same school. And again, kind of sidebar, if your child's starting a new school, well, then obviously we know why it's going to be difficult because it's like everything is fully new. But it's still always a new experience, even for kids that are returning to the same school. So what I like to do in the 2-week period as well is start going back over calming strategies and coping strategies. I don't use the word coping with kids because unless they're older, but a lot of the younger kids don't understand it. For adults, what I mean is if we're adding this into our nighttime routine, our morning routine, whatever, we want to start practicing calming strategies that are going to help our kids regulate themselves, right? They cannot problem solve or deal with issues if they're in an escalated state. So calming always needs to come before coping, and coping to me means problem solving. So that's why it's super important to practice those regularly. The other thing is if you're only recalling or, suggesting those calming strategies in a state of chaos, it is very unlikely that your child is going to put them into practice, right? They haven't built that as a habit. They're also in a state that is more escalated. So it's difficult to recall things that they do know and they feel comfortable with and they have practiced a lot. It's near impossible to recall things that we tell them to do only when they're upset, like take a deep breath or think about this positively or whatever, right? Take a body break. So you really want to bring these into your child's schedule. Again, you can do it during your nighttime routine, your morning routine, wherever, but we want to start bringing in some calming strategies. And then we want to start thinking about the hypothetical what ifs and going into coping and problem solving. So again, all kids are different. I look at this in 2 different ways. So I always look at, okay, what are the traditional, obvious challenges that kids might have kind of going back to school or in the grade that they're in? And we could talk about those from a hypothetical. So if this happens, what could we do? How do they make us feel? What are some actions we could take? How can we solve this problem? So you're already kind of getting ahead of that. Also, if you have a child that they have, particular challenges or struggles or sensitivities or whatever, you can also use that in your conversation, right? So I always think about, my daughter. I'm not worried about my daughter starting daycare. She's actually a very like well socialized kid. We've done tons of programs since she was a baby. She'll walk into a program, she'll go up to the teacher, she'll be around other kids, other parents. So that part I'm not really worried about at all. Obviously still me leaving is gonna is gonna be probably a little challenging for her, but that's not the part I'm worried about. The part that I'm like, oh, her and I need to work on this is, my child is very much of a rule follower. She, cleans everything up and, she does things in the order that they're supposed to be done. And she's, a more sensitive child, a more, organized child. And again, that works great when she's at home with us. But I know when she's in a classroom of potentially 30 kids, she might have a really hard time if other kids aren't playing the way that she thinks they need to play or following the rules that she thinks they need to follow. So flexibility is definitely something that I'm like, ooh, this is on my radar. And something that I've started doing with her already this week is during our play together, I've started acting, especially because she's 2. So obviously, she's really young. But as kids get older, there's just so much more that you can do with this. But even at a young age, you can do this. I'm already doing it with her, like I said. So I will play with her and I will essentially act out, like that child that she might face in that classroom and really already start helping her by modeling, how she could handle if someone doesn't listen to her, if someone takes something away from her, or, if they throw something at her, if they hit her or whatever. So we're already having, those practice moments. So that's something you want to think about as well with your kids is what are the general struggles that we can already start talking about in role playing and problem solving for, and what are their specific pain points that you can already try and get ahead of. Those are I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to add there. So yeah, that I think in terms of like future planning, is something that you definitely want to prioritize. And then lastly, what I want to leave you with is family rituals. So in our positive parenting program, we actually have like a whole bunch of modules on family dynamics and sibling dynamics. And actually in the fall, we're probably going to run a family dynamic workshop, which we talk about family rituals. But family rituals are so important just for the health and overall well-being of your family, right? So things that like you do that, are special to your family that your kids remember that essentially help eliminate stress and just make things more enjoyable. So what I want you to do here is I want you to think about what is your family ritual. So maybe, first days of school, maybe again, dad usually leaves early or whatever, but maybe we can adjust the schedule where first day of school, we always have breakfast together as a family. Or maybe it's, first day of school, like one of their favorite people, like grandma actually comes to pick you up so you can see her at the end of the school day. Maybe it is, again, you have their favorite breakfast or you remind them of your intentions for them, or you give them, again, those reminders of what you want them to remember during the day if it's hard, right? Maybe you write them a little note in their lunchbox, like whatever. It could be anything, but you want to think about what these rituals are and you want to make sure that you're doing them every year because it actually builds that excitement of the first day of school. So maybe it is after school, they get their favorite meal or they get to go out to eat with you, or, after school, we don't rush home, we go to the park, or even though it's a school night, after dinner, we watch a family movie, right? Because again, that was a big day for us. So it can be anything, but you want to think about what are your family rituals and how are these things making the day and the experience less stressful and actually more exciting. So with all that being said, I know, we're all in the countdown phase and I'm obviously here with you with it. My daughter is going to start as well. And this is the first time that she is starting nursery school and she's just, a little baby. So I am in all the feels the way that all of you are as well. For some of us as parents, we're just like, yes, I'm ready for them to go back to school. Others are like, oh, I wish that they were home longer. Some of us are just, feeling anxious about, is this launch going to go well? Is it not? There's so many feelings that come up with this. So whatever you're feeling, totally valid. And what I want to leave you with is if, you start school and you're noticing, I say, typically it takes about 2 weeks for everyone to kind of settle in to the school routine, which is kind of why we're always like start this 2 weeks before as well. But if your child is still really struggling at that 2 week mark, just remember you don't have to wait it out. We're here to support you. I mean, there's tons of clinics and places that can support you as well, but us specifically, we're here if you need us. But don't wait longer than that. If you find that they're still really struggling, it's so much better to just be proactive and get ahead of it because, yeah, we want to make sure that our kids are getting all the support they need during these like big transitions and these big moments in life. So, with that being said, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your summer, what's left of it anyway. And I hope we all have, a super successful launch and back to school in September.